Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. If you can take your seats, please. And just to save any confusion, this session we're looking at outside of the USA, across the borders, but specifically on finished vehicle logistics. If you're looking for parts logistics, that's in the room next door. This is the finished vehicle logistics session. So I hope you enjoyed your lunch hosted by UPDS, but I hope you didn't enjoy it too much because we've got an interesting session coming up. I guess, quite a bit of the focus is going to be on Mexico, but we're looking at a couple of other regions as well. So we'll be looking at what's happening internationally for finished vehicle logistics. What are the growth areas? What are the challenges for your sector? What other regions are you looking at? We heard in the morning from Brandon Mason from PwC AutoFacts about the growth. Automotive industry is growing, but a lot of the growth is going to be internationally. So I hope you're looking to act and be more global. We've got 3 presentations looking from service providers, really, looking at what they're doing, what they've done, solutions that they offer, challenges that they faced internationally. So I'd like to welcome to the podium the first speaker of the day, Bill Garrett, the President and CEO of Vascor.
There you go. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Louis. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I don't know where everybody went, but maybe they'll come in a little later. International finished vehicles. I'm going to take a little bit different approach than my counterparts here on the bench. But I'm not going to limit my comments to just North America. As I come up here, I try to come up with something a little bit different, something a little bit more informative, something maybe that's new. It's hard to get up here and do this and bring something that you don't tip your hand too much, but at the same time make it interesting. But before I get to that, I need to get to Vascor. We have 2 sides of the business. We have the inbound side, where we own a trucking entity with 125 trucks. We support 14 assembly plants in North America. And we run and manage over 1,000 routes a day with over 300 trucks, and we'll run about 53 million miles this year. On the finished vehicle side, we'll make over 10 million inspections this year on the finished vehicles. We operate over 20 yards with about 45,000 vehicles capable of holding. We fluctuate those yards with the volume and what we do with the network in terms of what the operating conditions dictate. We'll move over 1,000 VINs a day with our drive-away service. We perform upfit and accessorization services, as well as have a significant share of the finished vehicle claims business. Here's a picture of our operations around the country. We have over 100 sites where we have people. So we have a pretty good footprint across North America. And we get some awards. We were fortunate enough to be recognized with some very nice awards this year. The Vehicle Processing Center Award for our Toyota San Diego operation. We're the best emerging player according to the India Chamber of Commerce. We won the Hino Award for support during the West Coast strike, and we're proud of our 10-year sponsorship of AAR. So we're going to India. We look to India as our parent APLL had launched intermodal container operations. It became obvious that rail would be a great alternative to truck, with over 97% moving truck across a very difficult infrastructure. We put together a business plan, formed an operating entity, and started working with the railroad as they finished up their Automotive Transportation Initiative, or AFTO policy. In India, we deal with one railroad. It's owned by the government. It's 25% of their budget, and they have 1.6 million employees. So by any measure, it's a huge railroad. We hired a top shelf team of talent. We had train sets or rakes built. We invested in the rakes, and a rake is a set of 27 rail cars, bi-levels, much smaller than what we see in the US for obvious reasons, the height restrictions, and the cars are just smaller in India. We installed our systems. and ran our first rake in the fall of 2014. Our 5th rake will go into operation end of this month, with 6 by the end of the year. We have some challenges that we have to deal with, but nothing that we didn't expect, or not to the magnitude. Damages in India, a key part of our value prop is that we would limit the amount of damages. Damages in India are not recorded by the OE. They're not kept tracked. They're not really monitored. They're done at the last mile carrier settling it with the dealer. Key value prop that was not really helping us there, but keep in mind the damages in India, when you talk about the money you spend on repairing a car, it's a fraction of what we would spend to repair a car in the U.S. Fuel, we are competing against truck rates, so fuel has limited our competitiveness on some of the lanes. And transit times, it's a priority for the railroad to move people and food. Automobiles and parts is behind that. So we're working with them to help improve our transit times and speed up the trains. Another interesting fact is in India is that we can haul anything automotive related on those rail cars. It's not limited to just finished vehicles. We can haul freight, we can haul motorcycles, we can haul other. Some specifics about India in terms of customs. Like the U.S., personal relationships are key. A couple of interesting notes. Black and white are unlucky. Green, red, and yellow are lucky colors. So when you put your logo together, make sure you get the colors right on your logo. Lunches are favored to dinners for business, and religious beliefs may make leather offensive. So it's important to understand some of the customs before you go over. On to Mexico. We started in 2012, focusing on the finished vehicle business. We now operate across the country with over 10 sites and 250 employees. The explosion of the automotive industry in Mexico has presented several challenges. Automotive experienced personnel are tough to find, both management and hourly, and it's largely dependent on the region in terms of the scarcity. Theft issues are similar to U.S., and in some regions rates are higher than the U.S., for specifically keys and SD cards. And security of our people is also a concern that we take very seriously and have installed practices to mitigate that risk. We are stable and growing in Mexico, and here's a quick map that shows, oh, I didn't want that. It shows all the different sites we have down there. So we're big down there. We're doing a lot of things down there, and we're growing rapidly. Mexico customs. Family is the top of the list. Mother is the most important member in the family, or the central figure in the family. I think we could learn from that in the U.S., and I think that's very admirable. All my life I've been told not to make, or to make eye contact whenever you're speaking to somebody. When you're down in Mexico, if it's too much, it's offensive or it can be threatening. Personal relationships are critical. Much like we see in India and much like we see in the U.S., I think that's a global situation where personal relationships are critical to success. And again, the best time for a business meeting is a lunch meal, which is the main meal of the day. These next couple are a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but I came up with the top 5 ugly American behaviors. I boiled them down from 10 to 5, and I'm not going to go through each one of these, but basically what I'm trying to convey here is when you go into another country and you're going to do international business, respect, every one of these things boils down to respect. Arrogance is not something we need to take overseas, and the U.S. has a reputation when we travel for doing things we maybe shouldn't be doing, so it's important that you respect when you go over there and that you keep in mind some of these things that I have on this list that will help you operate more effectively there. I Googled some images, and I put "don't" at the top. I thought these were kind of cute. I'm hoping I'm not offending anybody in here. There's nobody related to anybody in here, but my intent was to enlighten, because some of the behaviors we see from our U.S. folks in foreign countries could be improved. Last slide. There's a great book out there called Kiss, Bow, or Shake Hands by Terry Morrison and Wayne Conway. Yeah, it covers just about every country you could potentially go into and operate, and it's a very good primer on what you need to do when you go into those countries and how you need to conduct yourself. do this. Get the book, read about the country you're going to before you get there. Don't do what I did. Go to the country, then get the book and come back and get all red-faced for all the things you screwed up. So it's a great book. But in closing, I will tell you, these are the keys to success for international. Get to know the country and its norms. Find top chef talent at all levels. Use a recruiter if appropriate to get the people that you need. Be humble, respect, and give your team all the support possible and recognize their accomplishments. And finally, we lost Yogi yesterday, who I thought was one of the great Yankees, and I tried to come up with one of his quotes that would fit a logistics conference, so I'll leave you with this. When you come to the fork in the road, take it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bill. Not many of you were probably expecting to hear about India when we talked about this session, but you know, they launched and shared some of their plans as it developed at our Automotive Logistics India conference, and it was a huge undertaking. Some, myself, thought it was a crazy undertaking, but it really has been developed well and really appreciated by the locals out there. Next up, to bring it, you know, also to talk at different areas, maybe focusing a little bit more on the Americas, I'd like to welcome to the stage Brian Mason, VP of Planning, Analysis and Development for Pasha Automotive Services.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Well, we'll start with a brief history of Earth. First, the Earth cooled. Man began to think about transportation. And Louis immediately began promoting the Finished Vehicles Global Conference. And as imports developed into the U.S., we developed this group of ports along both the east and west coast where vehicles flowed in. And that first model for most of the OEMs that operated from outside the U.S. was imported in on the coasts. From there, used inland transport to get in. But then what we saw was the OEMs later on started to build North American production. And so we still relied on ocean transport for what we call CBU inbound and inland freight. But we also started to complicate our network by also going outbound and having vehicles flow in both directions, both from the ports in and from the center part of the country out. If that wasn't complex enough, we added to that Mexico. And now we've got significant complexity added to the network in North America. And one of the challenges we see with that complexity is that you have a disproportionate number of vehicles coming north as compared to the number of loaded vehicles going south. And you know, the two arrows here are kind of indicative of the volume, but if you look at it in dollar amounts, and these are 2013 values, so it's gotten significantly more since then, but we have $21.6 billion worth of vehicles going from the USA to Mexico, but over 59.6 billion coming from Mexico up to the US. So you can kind of start to see what that displacement would do to the network of, you've got empty rail cars, you've got empty trucks, you've got empty vessels going one way or the other. And for the first time, what we saw just recently is the number of vehicles or the dollar value of vehicles leaving Mexico on truck exceeded the dollar value of vehicles leaving on rail. And again, you can see the complexity of the network starting to mount. And we've seen Mexico production grow dramatically, and managing transportation to and from Mexico has grown more complex. And one of the things that I wanted to focus on today was the traditional launch event. When you launch a new vehicle, and we call it a hard launch when I work for an OEM, and that is in usually a period of 3 to 5 days, you want to get one vehicle to every single dealer in the country. Now, doing that from the ports wasn't so difficult. Doing that from the center of the country wasn't so difficult. Doing that all the way down in Mexico can be a real challenge. And it's very challenging to amass a large number of vehicles in Mexico and then suddenly rail them all and truck them all north and make that 3 to 5 day time frame. And that's very important to most OEMs because that time frame is also timed in with marketing, internet marketing, advertising, things of that nature. So as a solution, one of the things that we're offering up really is the idea that give the OEMs a look at short sea opportunities on the West Coast. When I was with an OEM just 18 months ago, when we looked for West Coast short sea, there was almost no West Coast short sea available out of Mexico. It just wasn't available from any of the carriers. And all of a sudden now you have 4 or 5 very good, strong carriers who have regular weekly or biweekly service along the West Coast that service out of Lázaro and service a number of points on the West Coast. So what we're saying is if you're planning a hard launch and you really want that narrow time window of delivery, one of the ways you can help do that and help hit that time frame is pre-position those vehicles on the West Coast and then take advantage of fairly good empty railcar supply on the West Coast to populate as far east as Cincinnati, Kansas City, Chicago, Detroit, those areas. I think the benefits we see, and this is the Pasha facility in National City, we see short sea routes provide enhanced lead time, and we can get the vehicles from the port locations very quickly to those locations in the U.S. The ocean transport is consistently very, very low damage, so the cars get there reliably, they get there undamaged. And there's a lot of high-quality post-production accessories. If you want those installed at those locations, there's capability to do that as well. The other thing I think that we see is there's very safe long-term storage or short-term storage for vehicles at these coastal locations. It's very well secured, very low damage rates, very well managed. So it's something where you can be secure that your launch vehicles are going to be ready for your launch when it's time to go. And OEMs can even transship to Hawaii at select coast ports. We're happy to take your vehicles all the way. So just encourage you to take a fresh look at West Coast short sea if you haven't looked at it for a while, because it is really, over the last 2 years, really developed, and there's a lot of good service available from first-rate carriers into a lot of the good port facilities. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. Looking a bit more at the sea side of vehicle logistics. Next up, perhaps, also with a bit of a background on the ocean side of vehicle logistics, but to give us another viewpoint on Mexico, I'd like to welcome to the podium Robert Zavala, the head of Mexico for Wallenius Wilhelmsen Logistics.
Well, thanks everyone. I've entitled my presentation the Mexico Challenge. Over my tenure within WWL, I've had the opportunity to live outside of Mexico for around 4 years. I was in New Jersey for 2 years and in Norway for another 2, and came back to Mexico about 10 months ago, and it hasn't been easy to come back to my home country. One of the main reasons why is that you come back to reality and realize many things haven't changed. Like many fundamental things have not changed in Mexico. And Well, I'll go through these points here. First, a macro view on Mexico, and then some of the logistic challenges we see. To then go over a port overview, and then what I believe is the road ahead. If you read the Economist, this week Mexico made it to the front cover again after a few years, and the title of the article was Two Mexicos and Lessons for Development. And I think if I had to describe Mexico in one word, it would be duality, right? So we have one Mexico, the Mexico of the macroeconomic success, where you have an automotive boom, you have an aerospace industry boom, and we went from low-end manufacturing exports to high-end manufacturing exports. We have labor costs 20% lower than China. We have an inflation rate at history low, a positive GDP development, so on. But on the other hand, we have a Mexico which lacks a lot of infrastructure. It's still, with a lot of challenges on the security side, on the corruption, and we're still a little over 50% of the population live below poverty line. So this is just to give you a little bit of the context of what's going on in Mexico. So when it comes to the auto manufacturing boom, by 2020, we're going to have a production of 4.6 million units in 20 plants. When I left Mexico in 2011, and then when I got back, there was 3 more in the Bajío area, this central area, which has been very successful in attracting manufacturing plants. Then there will be 4 more in the next four years. And the reasons, you know the reasons why. I mean, these plants are coming to Mexico, as I said, very low labor costs. I think we made a rough calculation. A production employee probably makes $13 or $15 a day in Mexico, and then, of course, you have the proximity to the U.S. and some of the governments in these states where the plants are being established have been very accommodating, and they provided all the facilities for OEMs to establish there. The growth, so we're going to go from 3.2 million units produced in 2014 to 4.6 in 2020. North America will remain the main market for Mexico, for exports out of Mexico, but we also see other markets growing like Europe and the Middle East. Overall, we see between now and 2018 probably a growth in 9% of the seaborne traffic out of Mexico. So now I'm going to go over the logistic challenges that we face in Mexico. This map here shows the production was 3.2 million. 2.6 of those were bound for export, 2.1 bound to NAFTA, and 1.85 were carried by rail. Then, the remainder of the volume was short sea and mostly concentrated in Veracruz, which is a very congested port, and also the reason why we have some challenges down in Mexico. I guess the key challenge is infrastructure. So most of the infrastructure, the port and rail infrastructure that exists in Mexico now was developed probably 100 years ago. And even though there's been some investments, the basic infrastructure has been there for 100 years. So when the ports and the railroads were open for private investment, many things were left forgotten, right? So some ports do not have access, rail access, for instance, or the access is limited to one railroad or there's some investments that haven't taken place. So there's not good competitivity amongst the ports in Mexico. So you can see some of the numbers here when it comes to imports and exports, and how the exports, I think 63% of the exports were concentrated in Veracruz. That's going to continue to happen as we see it. I'll try to go quickly through this slide that shows some of the volumes from some of the plants located in the Bajío area, and how, of course, the exports follow the same flow, the same pattern, and most of the volumes go out via Veracruz, which is causing a lot of congestion in that port. Again, as I was saying, around 63% of the exports are coming out of Veracruz. So on the port side, this is just a brief overview of the ports. What we see, the ever-congested Veracruz continues to attract volumes. You can see some of the main highlights on the port and some of the challenges over there. Even though there's congestion, even though there's challenges with the north winds, the rail access cuts through the city, this port continues to attract volumes, and it will continue to do so for what we see. This is the expansion, the planned expansion for the port. It looks very good. The problem with the expansion plan is the timelines, right? It was, as you see there, the first stage, which is the container terminal, is supposed to be done by 2018. We see this is a challenging timeline, mainly because of the budget cuts recently made by the government because of the low oil prices. So we don't know if this is actually going to happen. And as you can see there, it's really not I wish it was a joke, but the railroad terminal is not going to be done probably before the 2030, and we're having the automotive boom just right now. Then going on to Lázaro, the main port in the Pacific for auto exports, imports, I think. When it comes to infrastructure, it's a very good port, and we call it a bright future that is currently compromised, still under legal action or for developing, for investing in a specialized auto terminal. And also currently Lázaro Cárdenas is located in the state of Michoacán, which is one of the most violent states still in Mexico. So some challenges on that side as well. And some other auto ports are being selectively used by OEMs. One is Acapulco, which is in the south of Mexico. It's basically being used because it's proximity with some of the plants in the south, but it doesn't have a rail access. It's no specialized auto terminal, small capacity. And then on the right-hand side, you can see Altamira, a port with also a very good infrastructure, currently used by just one OEM. And also, we don't see it developing as it should, as a true option for the Gulf of Mexico. Again, limited rail access, and the only rail access that Altamira has it goes through the north. So if you want to go from the center of Mexico to Altamira by rail, you need to go all the way north to Monterrey and then go down, which it doesn't really make sense from an infrastructure standpoint, but that's just the way it is now. So this is my last slide, which is the road ahead, things that we believe are going to happen in the next years. Railroads are investing in more rail cars, but we believe the shortages will continue, and the short sea volumes to the U.S., either West Coast, East Coast, will grow, as well as some of other sea volumes bound for Europe and Middle East, mainly. Off-port distribution centers will emerge. We see some of these distribution facilities, emerging in the proximity of the ports, just to alleviate congestion and become an option for OEMs just to store or idle their vehicles before the vessel transportation. And also some of the Pacific ports will maybe be used as an alternative for volumes that are currently just going through Veracruz. Maybe you can go to the Pacific and then cross the Panama Canal and go to Europe and some other places. Truck capacity, it's currently increasing and will continue to increase. So I can count 3 or 4 new trucking companies just doing operations in Mexico. This, of course, coming from the growth in sales, but mostly from, I believe, from the lack of rail cars on corridors that were normally, done by rail cars. Trucks have come to to serve there as well because of the lack of rail cars. That'll continue to be the case. I think the uncertainty about the port developments need to be cleared out, and I place the question there: how can a country that will produce 4.6 million vehicles lack in a specialized auto terminal? And finally, as long as we have 2 Mexicos, as long as we continue to have 2 Mexicos, security issues will continue to be a concern. This is a key one. We've heard of gunshots in rail terminals because vandalism is big now on rail cars, and problems like that are more fundamental to solve. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberto. Thank you for your overview on Mexico and some of the opportunities and also, as we also know, some of the tougher parts, the challenges of operating in what's an exciting and a great, growth market, but it's also quite a tough one. So you've heard a little bit, we've looked a little bit more internationally, a bit more automotive, a bit more maybe North American and Mexico. We looked at short sea, we looked at rail options. We've looked, at different multimodal options. So now it's your turn again. If there's any comments, questions for the panel, please raise your hand, wait for the microphone, and then say your name and your company name. But I wanted to ask the first question to Bill Garrett. It's just really about India. It was a surprise for me when it seemed at the time that APL Vascor were going to be investing in India, particularly when it was going to be rail. When you think of APL, the background originally was ocean, and it was a tough one to sort of, and even then it was containers more than anything else. So, and I don't know how involved you were in the background, but why India? Why would you choose such an interesting and tough market to invest in such an important way? The local Indian logistics companies, and there's some pretty huge ones, and some of the car makers themselves were trying to develop something like that. So why did APL Vascor get involved?
Well, the short answer is because I was told to, but I'll give you the long answer. India is going to be what I consider to be the Mexico of that hemisphere. I mean, it's going to be a net exporter. The cost of manufacture there is similar. It's very low-cost manufacturing country. So I think you're going to see a lot more plants going in there and a lot more volume being produced. The middle class in India is being developed. It's coming up, and I think the sales will grow there rapidly. Plus, there's also the big infrastructure challenges they have to go across India in a truck. We had the rail experience from working with APLL. We had all the complementary experience to the rail with what we do at Vascor on the rail loading and all of that. And I think the next phase we're going to see over there is really getting into the truck piece. The first and last mile trucking piece, I think, is the next piece that we're going to invest in, because what we're seeing over there is the market is expanding, and we're seeing the truck capacity become even more tight. So the OEs own the trucks, own the truckers in terms of giving them the capacity. We're going to have to figure out that first and last mile by putting some money into our own equipment to do that. But to answer your question directly, we see that as really being the big growth country in that hemisphere. And again, it'll be very much like Mexico in terms of a net exporter and a lot more volume coming out of that country.
Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure, if there is an answer to this, but, sharing, lessons learned, anything that, what did you take from the US to India? Is there anything that you've brought back thinking, wow, there's something we can bring to the US from India or to Mexico? Was there more of a similarity to Mexico, or were they all three completely different operations, markets, etc.?
Well, I think it's interesting you asked that, because what we did take there was our systems. We have replicated all of our systems in Mexico, and we operate over there off of the platform sitting in Georgetown, Kentucky. So we are using our scanners, we're using all of our technology just as if we were sitting in Detroit or wherever else in the U.S. It's all portable. In terms of what we learned there that we would bring back, not a whole lot different than Mexico. It's all about the people. It's about getting good people. It's about getting good processes, having the right IT applications, and the one key thing that was easier for us in India was the language barrier. It's all English there, so we didn't have to do any translations on our systems. We didn't have to do anything over again, and that made it much easier to deal with. But it's very similar to working in Mexico. It's hotter there. We're having to run a lot of our operations at nighttime in the summer, because inside the rail car it gets caught. It's so hot, it's prohibitive. You can't get in there during the day. But outside of that, it's very similar, Louis. I would tell you it's got a lot of similarities.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay, I don't know if anyone's got any comments or questions. Okay, a question that was kind of asked to me for some reason. And I don't think I've ever pretended to actually know anything about automotive logistics, and I've never tried to pretend that I'm in any way intelligent. But for some reason, the car makers often throw challenges at me. The head of multimodal and logistics from the SCT, which is the kind of Secretariat for Communication and Transport in Mexico, the Ministry of Transport in effect, just said to me, Louis, can you help solve our customs issues? So a simple thing. So I said, yeah, I'll come back to you with the answer in 10 minutes. But customs, literally moving across the border. How are you guys finding that? Is it as big a challenge as it seems to be if the Mexican government are asking for solutions? I don't know if there's any comments you can make on that. Maybe I'll start with Roberto on that.
I think when it comes to customs, it's become a lot better now. With so much volume, so many rail cars going north, I think it's become a lot better. We don't really see a lot of challenges on that side, and the customs brokers and the authorities and the OEMs have worked well together. We don't see a lot of issues there. I think some of the issues we've seen are more on the port side, and it has to do with the hours of operation and how flexible is that in the ports.
Mm-hmm. Of course it's got better. I had 10 minutes lunch with the Minister of Transport. Of course it's got better. But Brian or Bill, have you got any comments on customs?
I think from our perspective, on ocean freight, we've had no issues with customs. So for the short sea, that hasn't been a problem. The customs process for vessels is very well established, and we don't see any difference between Mexico inbound and international inbound from, say, Japan or Korea. We're pretty insulated from the customs process for rail because we don't have a rail crossing at our facility. So they've cleared customs by the time they arrive to us. So we don't see much to that, but I can't attest to whether it's gotten better or not.
No.
All I would add to that is I've spent a lot of time with my IT guys figuring out how to get all those links together and get all the information flowing amongst all the different parties, and it's been very complicated, but we've worked our way through it, and it's working well now. It's very complicated to get through it and all the different people that need information.
Mm-hmm. And the actual crossover, I mean, even in Europe, we have issues crossing borders. actually crossing the border, forgetting the customs point, but the actual crossover, is that a simple process? Is it a seamless process, or do you have to change locomotives or anything like that?
Well, I think in most cases it is. Yeah, of course, there's extraordinary situations sometimes, but I think in most cases it's seamless.
Okay, good. And short sea, you mentioned it, Brian. It's something that we were looking at because of the capacity kind of issues. How is short sea developing in general for linking Mexico to North America?
I think we've seen significant increase just in the last 18 months. As I mentioned, when I was previously with Toyota, the first time we did the network design out of Salamanca for the Toyota vehicles being produced at the Mazda plant there, it was 100% rail to all the West Coast destinations because there wasn't short sea. There was none in existence at that time. We kind of did a second look after about 12 months, and suddenly there were a lot of options, and we moved approximately 30% onto short sea at that time. And we also came up with some significant savings over that as well. So it's something where, and it also allows you to take advantage of, in some cases, some underutilized facilities on the coast where you can do some accessorization, you can store the vehicles, and you've got really good access to a pretty good empty supply for rail cars on the West Coast.
Mm-hmm. Roberto, anything to add to that? No, okay. And of course, the other kind of side to the short sea, and you mentioned it, Roberto, is the development of the ports. I think compared to other countries, Mexico, from an infrastructure perspective, is not too bad. You've got rail. It might not be perfect by any means, but it's better than Brazil, or even India, even though India's improving. The roads are reasonable. The ports, you kind of again got a few ports there. So, what about the investment in the infrastructure? How is that being affected by the low oil price? 'Cause I think they had big investment plans. Has that been scaled back? And how is the investment developing? Is there more private-public partnerships? Is there more ports, for example, you said was a big issue. So what about the investment how is the infrastructure and how is the investment in the infrastructure?
Well, the plans are still there. The expansion of Veracruz and the automotive terminal for Lázaro, the plans are there. The thing, I guess the issue is just the timing. The industry, us as an industry, we don't see it happening at the speed required by the industry. Mm-hmm. That's it. And there's a concern now that because of the budget cuts in some infrastructure projects, these timelines are even further delayed, right? So if infrastructure is already at capacity, if you're not fast enough on investing, you might create more bottlenecks, and then that's why some other alternatives are going to be needed, like some distribution centers outside of the ports, or trying to find alternatives for port of exit.
Mm-hmm. Anyone anything to add on the infrastructure investment, or ports perhaps in particular?
I'd like to add one, and that is what we're seeing is that, number one, we're seeing more vessel companies really recognize the opportunity for short sea, both East and West Coast, and so we're seeing more service. And we're now seeing in the United States a number of port processors, Pasha being among them, that is investing significant amounts to expand our facilities, expand our capabilities. We're looking at additional acreage at both our national city and our Grays Harbor facility in order to take some of this additional traffic. And I think there's quite a bit of infrastructure improvement there, and I think we've got really good partnerships with our rail partners, BNSF in National City and UP up in Grays Harbor, and I think they're all working with us as well to help us get vehicles both in and out of those facilities. So I think all along the coast, I think you're seeing good partnerships and a lot of investment and co-investment.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any questions or comments from the audience? Hello, is anybody there? A question at the front, please. Right, no lunch tomorrow.
I have a question on Mexico for anyone who kind of wants to take it. Talk a little bit about maybe labor developments there. I mean, no, WWL, I know you have a huge sort of land operation, lots of technical work in yards, and I think Vascor is also involved. So, I mean, in terms of training, the level of employees, availability of labor, all these kinds of things, is that situation strained? Is it improving? How would you describe that?
Well, we have a little over 1,000 people in Mexico. You know, a combination between production and admin. I think as this automotive boom continues, it'll be challenging. It'll be more challenging to get to acquire the right type of talent. We're more focusing on developing internally. As we believe that's the right way to go, but it's a concern within the automotive industry in Mexico as more plants and more suppliers get established to get the qualified people, the talented people that you need to run your business. Definitely a concern, something we're trying to address more internally.
The challenges we've had at Vascor with the personnel is really region specific. If we go to Saltillo, there's so many things going on there that there's more jobs than there are people. So people readily, turnover is a challenge because there's so many other opportunities. You get up into Monterrey or down in Toluca, we don't have those same problems, we don't have those same challenges. We're pretty stable, we can find the people. So there's pockets where it's tight and there's pockets where it's not so tight, but it's more region specific. In terms of the training, you know, we're looking for some people with some basic skills, so we do most of the training ourselves, so that hasn't been something that we really had a challenge with. It's just finding people that we can bring in, and we're not in a hyper-competitive market for that same labor.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We've touched on the trucking a little bit, but I don't know if anyone from the audience has got any comments, has invested, or got any comments on how the trucking capacity is developing in Mexico, whether it's from an OEM or a trucking company? No? Okay. And then there's the kind of, systems and IT development. You know, one of the companies that we know, Inform, the first time I really heard about Inform was that they were doing some stuff in Mexico. I don't think it was probably the first project that they ever worked on. But that was when I first came across some of the stuff you were doing. So I wanted to ask Ruud from Inform about what you guys have been doing, are doing in Mexico to develop systems and IT in the region.
Yeah, thank you, Louis. I'm happy to give an answer on that. I think it was in 2007 that we got a task from Volkswagen in Mexico to see if we not only could help them in the inbound logistics, what we already do in many factories for Volkswagen in Europe, but that we also checked out how there is optimization potential in the vehicle distribution area. We studied both inbound, we studied outbound, we studied also in-plant logistics to see where was the biggest potential to find opportunities for bigger efficiency. And what we realized was that the biggest opportunity was in vehicle distribution. And especially there, we noticed that the traditional way of organizing the IT systems was not good enough to take all the efficiency possibilities out of that supply chain. So we could add a lot of optimization technology in the yard management, also in the transport optimization area, also in the total supply chain visibility, so that they immediately had, let's say, the state-of-the-art vehicle logistic solution. And because the volumes are big there, more than 500,000 vehicles a year, it helped them a lot to speed up with providing the right deliveries to the dealers. So what's very interesting, I think, is still these days, Volkswagen is maybe one of the first in the world who has a full automated transport optimization solution. Which means that every evening the system runs to optimize the loads and the routes for all the trucks and take them to the dealers. And when we look to the market, hey, I know there are big transport companies who have their own systems for that, but as a standard software system, till now, not anyone has really worked that out to the detail, that it really works. And it's still working in Mexico, and it's also related to track and trace. So it's good to see that also the Mexican people are very interested in having state-of-the-art technology in doing supply chain. Mm-hmm. And they keep asking us as well to go for RFID, for other technologies, to see how they can stay advanced in the way how they work. So I think in that way it's very promising, also the Mexican market, to see how latest supply chain technology solutions could help to speed up all these vehicle delivery processes there.
Okay, thank you. Any comments or questions from the audience? No? Okay. Well, I think I'll wrap it up there. I think we've had some interesting presentations, sharing some of their views, ideas on what's happening in Mexico, what you guys are doing, and some thoughts on how the industry is developing. I'd like to remind everybody that end of January in Mexico City will be our second Automotive Logistics Mexico conference. If you're more interested in what Bill was saying about India, in Delhi in December, we've got our Automotive Logistics India conference. So don't be too internalized. You know, this is Automotive Logistics Global, and global doesn't mean North America. So, you know, you heard from Brandon Mason this morning that the automotive logistics industry is going to grow. It's still going to grow hugely over the next number of years, but it isn't necessarily just going to be in North America. It's certainly going to be in Asia and certainly going to be in other parts of the world. So maybe it's a time to look more internationally and understand what's happening around the world. But thank you very much for the panel. Please enjoy our coffee. Our coffee break's hosted by Serge, and we're all back together in one room for the last session, which will be on big data and big data analytics. Thank you.